That's the reason. You've got an OJ extender, that's why.
No, I don't think so. I should have the shine off.
Same thing.
When I was when I did my thing,
Let's go to the focus.
yes, I heard.
Are we live?
Yeah, we're live. Oh, it's popped. I put in the wrong name. Wait, it should be live anyway. By mistake, put in.
We wouldn't know where it is though.
What do you mean? You wouldn't know where it is?
We wouldn't know where the YouTube channel is.
It's on my. It's on. You should be able to find it. It's on. It is on.
It might be on, but it's not on the Yehuda Steinberg.
It's on. It's on YouTube. Either way live. We're live. And we're live.
Because when you press live. Oh, so it is Moshe. Why can't you get it?
Is it on the normal Yehuda Steinberg thing?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got it. I don't know why it's usually popped up.
Can you change the name or you can't change the name?
Afterwards.
If you want to.
Who's watching?
No one.
Ian and Shurka, could
Gewach.
There's also got COVID.
Yehuda,
Yehuda who?
Stern. No. It's three people.
He's got it.
I just say very briefly. One of the minhagim of Chanukah is to play dreidel. Why do you play dreidel? The Bach asks the question, and normally for every golus there has to be an avera. What was the avera they did in Chanukah? Anybody know what's the avera they did? By like for example, by Chumai Sheni was Snaschinam, by Srisha was Gilawish. So what did we do wrong to get the Yevonim?
Hellenized.
But that's after the Yevonim came. What did we do wrong to get the Yevonim? The Bach answers this Rashlu Ba'avoida. People became lazy. That means they did everything right without any enthusiasm. What happens to a dreidel when it slows down? Falls over. Dreidel reminds you that while you're working hard, while you're moving, you can stand up. The minute that you take things too easy, you fall completely. So to remind us of that message, we play with the dreidel. It only stands while it's moving fast. What we should do is we say every night another word in playing the dreidel. Lots of different things. It was a nice word that. Oh yeah, that Shiur. Oh, so it's a nice word. Okay, we're starting Be'ezus Hashem Yisborach, a new perek, new topic about the halacha. Now we mentioned right at the beginning that Pesachim goes chronologically. So the first perek discussed the night of the 13th going on to 14th, where you do because chametz. Now we're already in the morning of El Pesach, and we're getting rid of our chametz, and we need to know when we've got time and we're allowed to eat hano, etc. Says the Mishnah, Kol shor shemutar le'echol, why you're allowed to eat, ma'achil behema, you're allowed to feed your animal, and lechayel, to a wild animal, or le'oifos, and to birds. Rashi obviously points out that there's no chiddush you're allowed to feed the animals. If you're allowed to eat it yourself, of course you're allowed to feed the animals. The chiddush is what? That when you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to feed animals. So if you're walking on Pesach, you're not allowed to take bread and feed the ducks and eat them park. There's a big machloikus. Oh, I shouldn't have said it like that. There's a big machloikus. What is the issa of feeding animals on Pesach? What's the issa? What's wrong? Hano, pleasure. What's the pleasure of feeding animals? Oh, the fatter. Very good, the fatter. Means what happens is, if you've got a sheep and you feed it a piece of chametz, now the sheep will be worth more because it's fatter. Or if you don't feed it, it'll be starving, the sheep might die, so you're gaining. So if that's the case, if I go around to Heaton Park and feed the ducks, am I doing anything wrong?
Yeah, no.
It's like, according to what you just said,
no, not for that, no.
According to what you just said, there'll be mutzah because you said the issa is because you're gaining that you're fattening them up. So if I walk around the place, say that on Pesach, and I see a slice of bread on the floor next to the pond, so I kick it with my foot so that it should now reach.
It's yours, then.
Right. So have I done anything wrong? No, the issa we can off comments not just if it's yours, and if it's not yours, no.
What you getting? Not your ducks.
Not your ducks, not your food, nothing.
Yeah, but you do get hano from feeding the
If
ducks.
you're a child,
There is a hano.
What's the hano?
If you're a
Do you have
child,
fun? You take kids to the park.
if you're a child, yeah, not if you're an adult.
No, not even if you're an adult. There is hano.
This I know. Have you never fed a lion or
It's not yours.
You take your kids to the park and they're feeding the ducks.
You can't watch someone feed the ducks.
Oh, that's a very good question. Wait a second, let's finish first. Well, this question, we'll go to another question. What we're arguing about now is a machloikas in the Rishonim. Some say the whole issa is only to feed your animals as Chaim started off. The issa is that you're fattening the animals, or if you don't give them chametz, what will happen is you'll end up that the animal will be starving. So that is the hano. The other Rishonim might say the issa is the act of feeding, like you wanted to say. Therefore, what's the issa of feeding? The pleasure. And therefore, if you're walking around on Eden Park and you pick up a piece of bread from the floor and give it to the ducks, you don't gain. The ducks are not fatter, and if they are fatter, you're getting nothing from it. It's still lost. That's machlikas Rishonim.
I go to the farm.
They go to a farm
Well,
feeding.
they have to pay for this if I do it.
Another issue, Chaim pointing, this is going to come to one other things. Can you watch somebody feeding the ducks bread on Pesach? Let's say you enjoy watching it. What would you say?
Past a bakery, a non-kosher bakery.
Oh, that's right. That will come to a later stage. So the Mishnah says that while you're allowed to eat, you're allowed to feed your animals, but when you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to feed the animals. You're allowed to get pleasure. The Gemara is going to ask if you're allowed to get pleasure. Of course, you're allowed to feed it to animals. Of course, you're allowed to, like, why is Mishnah to say it in 3 different ways? Okay. You're not allowed to get pleasure. You're not allowed to even use it as an oven fuel. And again, the Gemara is going to ask the question: if you're not allowed to get hano, of course you're not allowed to use it as fuel. For the only way to do biur chametz is only by burning. You could also crumble it and throw it to the wind, or matter the yom, or put it in the sea. There's a machlokes is showing him whether the word af should be goes the word af or not. If you look carefully, the Rosh and the Rif did not have the word af. In some Gemaras, they actually have it. Your Gemara has that the word af is not inside the Rishonim. What's an af if you goes the word af? Af means you can also, meaning that b'diavad, meaning that really you should burn it. But you don't have to. You can also scatter it to the wind. So go machleikas, do the Chachamim hold that burning is better or not? That is the question of it. That's a fundamental question. Is burning better according to the Chachamim? Is there an inyan to burn it according to the Chachamim?
What do you call hano? Hano direct.
Oh, that is something
Is
which
it
that's,
direct or indirect?
that is the question we could have later about smelling in the bakery, about watching somebody feeding the ducks. Okay. So this machlikas whether according to the Chachamim burning is better. Now, the Gemara is going to spend some time discussing who's our Mishnah Gola. We had 3 shittas, if you remember, in the last page regarding the time when you're not allowed to eat chametz, the time you have to stop getting hano. We had shittas Rav Meir. Rav Meir says that you're allowed to eat it for the first 5 hours of the day, and the last hour, the 6th hour, you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to get pleasure. That's shittas Rav Meir. Rabbi Yehuda splits it. 4 hours you're allowed to eat, the 5th hour you're allowed to get pleasure, and then afterwards you're not even allowed to get pleasure with our body. So he splits it. And then Rabbi Gamliel, that makes a pshor between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Does anybody remember the pshor of Rabbi Gamliel? Truma. Very good. Truma, we don't want to get rid of it too quickly. So we allow you to eat it for a bit longer than, according to Bechulin, he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. The question is, which was our Mishnah go like? Says the Gemara, Kol shor shemutalech, when you're allowed to eat it ma'achel, or Kol shor she'einu mutalech, and if you're not allowed to eat, einu ma'achel, you're not allowed to feed it. That means the issa achila, the issa hano, the issa to eat, the issa to enjoy, come at the same time. This is the Leiku Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda, chomish, you've got the 5th hour. The einu yoichel. You're not allowed to eat it, or ma'achel, you're allowed to get pleasure. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it goes 4 hours, don't eat it. The 1 hour, you're not allowed to eat, you're allowed to get pleasure. And then you have to burn it. So our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, it's nan. Because we've got a Mishnah which we learned in the last paper. You could eat it for the first 5 hours, or so from the Tchilas Sheish, and then you could burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. You can eat it for the 4 hours. But the 5th hour, you have to get pleasure, but not eat it for the Tchilas Sheish. So therefore, our Mishnah is obviously not like Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's a time you're allowed to get pleasure, you're not allowed to eat it. And now our Mishnah says that the 2 things go hand in hand. When you're allowed to eat it, you have to get pleasure. When you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to get pleasure. So our Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir. Says Movel Ma'ira Mei. Says our Mishnah like Rabbi Meir. Hakol shor shemuter lechol ma'achel. Hakol shor she'ochel ma'achel mi'boilei. Mishnah needs to say any hour where you're permitted to eat, you're permitted to feed. The Mishnah should say while you're eating, you can feed it. The word mutter over here is spare. If I want to say while you eat it, you have to get pleasure, I don't say mutter. While you eat it, you can get pleasure. Why does it call shor shemuter lechol? While it is permitted to be eaten, so it is permitted to be given pleasure. Why does the Mishnah need to add the word mutter? According to me, it's not necessary. Our Mishnah fits in like a Gamliel, and then the word mutter makes sense. It's non Gamliel. You can eat it for 4 hours. Truma kol chomish, but beginning of the 6th hour. And now we can understand our Mishnah. Kol shor shemuter lechol kohen betruma. while a kohen is allowed to eat tvuma, Yisol machil chulin be'evol echayv loifer. So Yisol is allowed to feed it to an animal, wild animals and birds. Meaning like this, koshosh shemuter lechem. While it's mutter to be eaten by A, who's A kohen, then B, a Yisrael, is allowed to get pleasure. So what's happening is the word mutter over here, the reason why it's added the word mutter is to remind us that we're talking about two different people. We don't say, while you eat, you get pleasure, because then it's still about the same person. We say, while it's permitted to be eaten by anybody, meaning by somebody at least, by a kohen, it is permitted to get pleasure. Who's that? That's the Yisrael. So our Mishnah is the Ma'aser Shittas Gamliel. So it's a little bit bothered, because the Gemara starts off, let's say our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The Ma'aser Maskon is our Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda not. So you can't say lema. Let us say our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda, when in fact it is actually not like Rabbi Yehuda. So it says that the Gemara meant let us say our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda, but like Rameir, and that's not true because it's neither Rabbi Yehuda nor Rameir. And when the Gemara says lema, let us say, let us suggest it, it means let us suggest the Mishnah is like Rameir. No, it's not like Rameir. This also points out important halacha, first thesis, that when you sell chometz, even though it is asa b'hano, but the money is not asa b'hano. There are certain things. Does anybody know offhand something which, if you sell it, you're not allowed to get pleasure from the money? Quite common. Yeah, it's really much more common. What? But there's shmita. Shmita produce is the main produce. Tefes. But if you sell shmita produce, the money is forbidden. Right? If you've got money for, if you go to a farmer, it's a big problem. I just got tshuva about, not tshuva, it's a small paragraph. Whether if you go to a non-farm farmer, the year of shmita, can you get? You want to buy a bottle of Coke from him, and he gives you change. How can you? You know, these shops which sell shmita produce because the change. No, the money becomes also bad no. Chometz doesn't come also bad no. Yeah, that's what the actual money becomes forbidden. Shmita. Okay, I'll get you off good. Okay, the Mishnah says three things: you're allowed to feed your animals. When our children come home from school, Behema is domesticated animal and Chai is a non-domesticated animal. I once asked one of my daughters, what's a domesticated animal? I had no idea. But that's how I have to translate it to differentiate between Chai and Behema. Chai just means a wild animal. Behema means a normal animal. Behema is like a sheep. Chai is like a lion.
Farm animals and
what? Farm animals. Okay.
Wow.
So Mishnah says three. Behema, Chai, and Oifus. Why is Mishnah to say three? Says God, lo Mr. Behemo, lo Mr. Chayot. Tzricha. Eat on the Behemo, di Meshai Chazilo. Animals, normal animals, farm animals, when they eat, they leave it over in front of you. You say, leave it, you can see it. Our Chayot di Meshai Kamatzna. Wild animals don't hide it, they hide it. And look, eat on the Chavish of the Meshai Mias Matzna, it hides it. Our Behemo Zim the Meshai, but the Massacre de da table realize Kale Bali or Bali Matza. Look, Tzricha. Here is a very problematic Gemara. I have to say, all the Rishonim ask the same question. Normally, when the Gemara finds two different things, Behema and Chayil, and want to find a Chiddush in both, so we'll find something different, say something special about Behema and something special about Chayil, we'll find it Tzrichusa, why it's necessary. Here, the Gemara uses the same piece of logic, wants to say that Behema is more Kodesh, wants to say Chayil. First, it says, Behema, you might have thought that you're allowed to, why are you allowed to? Because you'll be able to see it. But wild animal, you won't be able to see it, so that's no good. And if you will say by wild animals, you say, because wild animals, you can't see it, but behemoth that you can't see it. Again, is not being able to see it an advantage or disadvantage? If it's an advantage, so then just tell me behemoth. If it's a disadvantage, very good, but even better. You're right. You're going on the right malach. You still something saying it. This is bemis on the Rishonim. One of the Rishonim. The Pashas last pshat Thurs. But let's hear the question first. You're saying that wild animals. This is the reality. When a lad eats, it puts away the leftover foods in the hole. You don't sit. When a sheep eats, it leaves it out in the garden. So now the Mishnah tells us you can feed both of them. That means at 3 hours, let's say 10 o'clock in the morning at Pesach, go to your garden, feed your cow, and then feed your snake. No problems, even though the snakes are going to hide. The question is, which one's the bigger chiddush? What starts off first with saying, this one hides, this one doesn't. This one.
Then we're going to get to it anyway. We'll never go there.
So the Gemara finds a chiddush in both, but both times using the logic of hiding. And the answer is, like Shai said, that it depends for what. Like this. If we're concerned, on one hand, by hiding it, it's going to be a major problem. What's the major problem by hiding it? The major problem is you'll forget that you gave it. You'll give them a loaf of bread. And then what will happen is you'll forget that you gave them a loaf of bread. Wait a second. And now the snake hides it. And then comes 3 days into Pesach, you're walking around your garden, and your child suddenly finds a piece of bread. So therefore, hiding it is actually worse. Because in the end of the day, Bishlam will buy a sheep. You'll give it at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And when it comes to 11 o'clock, the time for you to burn it, you'll see that there's bread on the floor there. So since you'll see the bread, you'll make sure to get rid of it. But the snake, you'll forget that you gave a little bread. You think maybe the snake finished eating it. And then you won't realize that the snake really hit half. And then on Pesach, you'll come to find it and come to eat it.
How do you ever do it to a wild animal? No way you ever go into its cage and start.
No, to us, he's got wild animals, got deer. So I use a snake and a lion to be more dramatic. But Chai can also be a deer. The fact is, you've got it in your garden. So now he never finished it, he hid it. And comes to Pesach, he'll come to eat it. So hiding it is actually a disadvantage, come to eat it. But on the other hand, it can also be an advantage. Because like this, Behema, you may leave it and not do anything about it. And then you'll be over by because it's in front of you. Mashikin by Chayo, if you don't do anything about it, who cares? Because it's hidden. So at least you won't be over by because at the end of the day, it's gone, it's disappeared. So therefore, on one hand, it's being a disadvantage. On one hand, it's a disadvantage. It's a very strange. It's very strange that Moshe used the same logic with a disadvantage. And he says, Mamish, he explains taste like you were saying that what? That the gabbe, there is some eating it. So then it's a disadvantage. The fact that they hide it because you're more likely to eat it because you won't know that it's been hidden. It's an advantage that they hide it because then you won't see it and they won't be over bali or bali motza. It's hidden. Okay. Says the Gemara, okay, oifos normally. Why mention birds? What's the idea to the baby of a chat on the nami oifos? Once we mention mention birds, we also mention all three together. So the Mishnah tells us you're allowed to give it to you at 9 o'clock in the morning and then Pesach this year. Without this year got Shabbos, got problem feeding animals on Shabbos. But let's say no Pesach. What? For your own. If you've got we'll tell them Alecha, and if they can't eat themselves, or if they can eat themselves, you can't. If they need to eat and they can't eat on their own, you need to help them out. Okay.
So it takes it away somewhere and leaves it somewhere else out of the trust that you issue.
No, it's not. You're allowed to sell it to a goy. Furthermore, pshita, of course you're allowed to sell it to a goy. You're still allowed to eat it. What's the chiddush out? Imagine you can't see a calf. Of course you can sell it to a goy. Pshita. Fuki my Tana to tell you not like this Tana. The Tana b'Shamai imim kodem chametz lenochem kili dabo yishech lekod Pesach. Imagine what this chumah b'Shamai. You're not allowed to sell chametz on the of Pesach unless you can finish it and you know it's going to finish before Pesach. Right. So there's two reasons why that is. One is Shittas Rashi. Shittas Rashi is because since it is Erev Pesach, you have a mitzvah of biur chametz. The mitzvah of biur chametz is to get rid of the chametz. How have you got rid of it? It's still in the world. There's a mitzvah to destroy it. Since you have a mitzvah to destroy it, you are not allowed to sell it. Yes. Oh, we'll come to it in a minute. Because that's a huge chumrah Moshe is pointing out. All the people like Habers, if they've got a shop, they have to sell. They won't be able to sell the chametz to the goy. It would be impossible to sell chametz to the goy. So it's 100. No, but they have to actually be able to finish. It has to be you know they're good fish for Pesach. That's right. I said there's two malachim. One malach is because of this biur, that's just a Rashi. The man says it's a gzera d'Rabbanon. And what will happen is that people will not sell it properly and they'll think that it's in the Rishus. So that's right. Right back out. It's got gzera d'Rabbanon. To sell. Top of Chafalef on its base. You have Yehuda Steinberg kutach. Kutach was a dip. Does anybody know what's inside the dip of kutach? Not cheese. Stale bread, old milk, and salt.
Make this one, so you'll have too many times. Try it out.
Now what happens is, because it's a dip, what's the problem of kutach? What's the problem of kutach? What's the problem because it's the dip? Yeah, but another problem. People take a long time to eat a dip. A small jar of chrein can take 2 months to finish, a month to finish. By shaking a small packet of biscuits can eat it in 2 minutes. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda is talking about a jar of kutach. Also, you're not allowed for 30 days before Pesach. And again, we have machlokes ashtes, not machlokes ashtes on this page. Rashi holds that it's going to be shittas b'Shamai. Now, b'Shamai say you have to finish it before Pesach. Says Rabbi Yehuda, don't think that if I'm selling them a jar of kutach, I can sell it the day before Pesach because it takes 5 minutes to eat a jar. No, that is true if it's a jar of biscuits. If it's a jar of kutach, then you have to make sure 30 days before Pesach to sell it. Because that way, what's the mile of selling 30 days before Pesach? Not because he'll finish it in 30 days. A jar of kutach takes more than 30 days to finish it. But because it's before 30 days, what's the svara of Rashi? You've not got mitzvah biur chametz. The mitzvah biur chametz only falls into place 30 days before Pesach. That's why, for example, you go away more than 30 days before Pesach, you're not coming home for Pesach, you've got a mitzvah bil chametz. So the according to Rashi says two chidushim. First of all, we're talking about kshitas b'shamai, and second of all, because it takes longer than 30 days to eat kutach, but before 30 days, you're not mechuyev to get rid of your chametz. That is how Rashi is. Thurs says no, it's going to be kshitas b'shilom. So why can't you sell kutach? Kutach was like a special kind of dip, like David's deli kind of dip. So what happens is, if you sell to a goy something which is unique to the owner, so everybody knows, it's his dip. So it's the name of the Yid who be in the house. What will happen is you go to a goy's house on the second day of the Chol Pesach, and you pop in and you see David's deli's dip on the table. So you think that David's deli dip, he made this dip on Pesach. So because it's a famous food which is made by the manufacturer, it's no good. So therefore you have to do it. Look at the thesis. Shem ba'olav ya'lov. Yodim shekutach shepodi v'yispo shemoch b'Pesach. Yadav yispo shepesach v'yitzol doch. Very good. No, we don't. The problem saying is different. That's not because of this one. We don't pass it. Umuta ba'ano, you're allowed to get hano. Says well, pshita. Of course, you're allowed to get hano. If you're allowed to eat it, you're allowed to get hano. Leitzvicha shechocho kud zmanu. V'komash belong to the rova. Doma rova chocho kud zmanu muta ba'ano aflechas manu. Baby chadish rova. We pass like this rova. When the Mishnah says you're allowed to get hano, we don't mean on erev Pesach. We mean on Pesach. But we're talking about a situation where you burn the chametz. You took a slice of bread, you burnt it, and now on Pesach you want to use it as a doorstopper. Can you or can you not? So Rava says that since it was burnt on the Pesach, you can use it on Pesach as a doorstopper. Now, how much do you have to burn it? Another machlok Rashi Tosfos. Tosfos says that it can't be eaten by a dog, and we pass like Tosfos. That it has to be properly burnt. I've seen many times, unfortunately, I remember to get safe. You see this almost every year. You go past fires on Pesach and you see slices of bread which have not been burnt. A person could eat it if you want to be fussy. Sometimes. So what? We haven't done the mitzvah of Biur Chametz, and who says that if they did, you're totally right. The Torah says, Rashi doesn't say that much. Rashi says you have to burn it enough that it doesn't taste nice and it doesn't look nice. Now, this is referring to somebody who burnt it before the time of Issur Chametz. That means he burnt it, let's say the burning of Chametz is 11 o'clock, he burnt it at 9 o'clock, on Pesach he can use it. But if you find Chametz on Pesach, Rashi and Tosfos are more machmir. It's not enough to burn it that it doesn't taste nice. It's not enough to burn it that the dog can't eat it. How much do you have to burn it? Until it is properly ashes. So a person finds a piece of chametz on Pesach, he has to burn it until it's actually pure ashes, nothing less. That means literally ashes and nothing more. Okay. Says go weiter. Also, if the time passes, you're not allowed to get no pshita, it is pashut. Now Rashi over here says the word pshita doesn't make any sense, and he crosses it out. Now, why does it say it doesn't make any sense? I'll explain to you why. We're going to have a big machlokes tanoim. Three-way machlokes. It's good to come up again and again. It's good to write it on your fridge or even on your walls if you've got no space on your fridge. And that is a three-way machlokes. What's the three-way machlokes? One shitta is that you're not allowed to get hano from Pesach chametz on Pesach, and also after Pesach you're not allowed to get hano. Can you imagine? Now, if you've got chametz, you're not allowed to get hano after Pesach. One shitta is shitta Rabbi that you're allowed to get hano of chametz on Pesach and after Pesach. Rabbi Yossi holds that on Pesach you're allowed to get pleasure from chametz. Rabbi Yossi, we've had this shit of Rabbi Yossi many times. You're allowed to get a no from chametz on Pesach. Can you imagine such? You're allowed to get pleasure from chametz Pesach. Shit of Rabbi Yossi. And then I have in between shitta Rabbi Yehuda that says that it depends. On Pesach it's also no, after Pesach it's mutar no. Says Rashi, how can you say pshita that once it's Pesach it's also no? It's not pashut. Why is it not pashut? Because Rabbi Yossi was not like that. Tosfos again argues with Rashi. He says it is pashut. If anybody can guess what Tosfos says, why is it pashut? Yes, but why is it pashut that we're doing it like Rabbi Yossi? Because in the parak earlier we had a mention that Moses says earlier that you have to burn chametz. Since you have to burn chametz, it's a why you can't get no. Because according to Rabbi Yossi, there's no reason to burn it. You can get no from it. Okay.
Why does Rabbi Yossi not?
We'll see. That's going to be a huge topic. The 6th hour, when you're not allowed to get no. If a person takes a piece of bread, when it's only awesome into Rabbanon, that is in the 6th hour, before the 7th hour, and he gives it to a woman and says, even if he uses chutei kudnaisa, what's special about chutei kudnaisa? What's special about them? We had it before. Very good. It takes very hard for them to become chametz. They're very dry. For some reason, they don't become chametz easily. In the choshen and kiddushin, it's not considered a kiddushin. Oh, minatir to ma'aser kiddushin should be ish sish b'devai. So what's the answer? No. Why is it not kiddushin? At the end of the day, midevai, it's worth because only midrabanan it's also what? That's what Rashi answers. That since you take it as Moshe v'Yisrael and midrabanan it is also ba'ano, so Moshe would not approve of this guy's kiddushin because it's not worth anything. That's what Rashi answers. What does this say? So he says, who cares whether midrabanan it's also midoraisa it's also? At the end of the day, it's worthless. If it's worthless, how can you kaddish an isha? Like if you give a woman a coin, imagine when you give a pound coin. But now the English government have said that this pound coin is out of currency. You can't use it. Is she mekudeshes? Of course not. Why not? Because the mice it's not worth anything. Who cares if it's not? So you go right. But she's not allowed to because it's also a non-midrabanan. So it's actually worthless. The mice is worthless. Okay. Right. I'm not allowed to burn it on Pesach as fuel. Of course, he's not allowed to. He said it's also bano. Yehuda says that you have to burn it. Since Yehuda said the mitzvah of chometz is to burn it. So bad because if this hani minish get pleasure, kamash malon. That's the chiddush. That means the chiddush is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mitzvah is to burn chometz. You might say to yourself, if my mitzvah is to burn it, okay, I'll burn it. How am I going to burn it? I'll burn it in my oven to bake my matzahs. Can you imagine you've got a loaf of bread? I burn my loaf of bread in order to be able to heat my house up or to be able to bake my matzahs. Kamashmanon, you're not allowed to. As you say this to Kates over here, that when it comes to Issa Hano, there's usually two categories. There's Nisrofin and Nikiborin. There are some Isurei Hano, things which you're not allowed to get pleasure, which the mitzvah is to bury them, and some, the mitzvah is to burn them. We're going to see this much later. There's some Isurei Hano which you have to bury, and some Isurei Hano which the mitzvah is to burn. What's an afkamin nisrofin and nikiborin? Are you allowed to get pleasure from the ashes? If the mitzvah is to bury it, you're not allowed to get pleasure from the ashes because the mitzvah is to bury it. You're never allowed to use it. If the mitzvah is to burn it, once you've burnt it, you've done your mitzvah. You're allowed to get that. You're allowed to enjoy the ashes. You can use the ashes for soap. In those days, they used to use the ashes for soap. So therefore, maybe even nowadays. So therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that you're allowed to burn the mitzvah is to burn it. Right? No, kamash malon, you're not allowed to get no during the burning. Now we're going to have a sugya that goes on for 4 or 5 amudim, a long time. And it's referring to one question. And it is a bit tedious, but it goes to Shas with this one question. When the Torah says don't eat something, lo yochal, don't eat something, what does it mean? Does it mean not to be eaten, but you're allowed to get pleasure? Or does it mean don't eat and don't get pleasure? Now the machlokes is only when the Torah says lo yochal, lo yochal, lo yochlu. But when the Torah says lo yeochel, then everybody agrees you're not allowed to eat and not allowed to get pleasure. You should write this down literally everywhere you can see on your wallet. New wallpaper. Again, when the Torah says lo ye'ochel, everybody agrees you're not allowed to eat and you're not allowed to get pleasure. When the Torah says lo soichlu, lo yoichal, lo yoichlu, then it's a machloikas if you're allowed to get pleasure or not. Why? What's the logic? Because one man says, the Torah says don't eat, that means don't have any kind of pleasure, don't enjoy it. So therefore, it doesn't make a difference if you say lo yochal, lo se'ochel, lo yochlu, it's always asabano. The other man says no. When the Torah says lo yochal, don't eat it, fine. So you're not allowed to eat it, but pleasure you're allowed to. When the Torah says lo ye'ochel, it shall not be eaten. What the Torah means is don't do anything with this that helps you get to eat. Now, most pleasures, Rashi says, are all for the sake that you should be able to have what to eat. All pleasures, bottom line is that we should have what to eat. For example, you work, you earn something, you get a diamond. What do you do with the diamond? You sell it in order to have what to eat. That's the main pleasure in life. So lo ye'ochel, don't do anything that will cause you to eventually be able to eat. Included in that is hano. Okay, get this very clear. If you've not got this clear, it'll be a mamish loss. When the Torah says lo yochel, what does that mean? Machloikas. One man says it means don't eat and don't get pleasure. One man says don't eat, but you're allowed to get pleasure. When the Torah says lo ye'ochel, what does the Torah mean? Can't do anything. Right. Let's see the go.
Usually, generally, it can't be eaten as in by animals. What's going to where in that does it say
Right, so that's how I tried to explain before, that we're explaining lo ye'ochel, don't do anything with it that it should help you be able to have something to eat.
I understand. Where does how do you get that?
Lo ye'ochel, it shall not have anything that can cause it to be eaten. That means this food should not be something that causes you to be able to eat. So by selling it for pleasure, you have what to eat. Okay. This goes on for many, many pages. As you can imagine, there are many, many times the Torah says, and we have to understand every time the halacha is high. How do you know you're not allowed to get hana on Pesach for chametz? Shenema, lo ye'ochel chametz. Lo ye'ochel chametz. Lo ye'boy eta achila, nothing that can help you eat. It says more time because lo ye'ochel chametz, or lo yikosav lo ye'ochel. Hava min es achila mashma, es ano lo mashma. Had the Torah not written lo yochel, had the Torah written lo soichlu, lo yochal, then you would have said you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat, but you're allowed to get pleasure. Only because the Torah says lo yochel, therefore that's why it's asa achil and issa hano. Upligit abavo. The Omar abavo komokush nema lo yochal, lo soichal, lo soichlu, echad issa achil v'echad issa no mashma. It's always asa to eat, issa tano, at yifad l'cha akosu g'der shapar l'cha b'nevela. Until the Torah tells you you're allowed to enjoy it. Again, Rabbi Vol says, whenever the Torah says don't eat, whichever language the Torah says, lo soichal, lo yochlu, lo yochal, lo yochel, whatever language the Torah uses, what does it mean? You can't eat, you can't get pleasure. That's Shittas Rabbi Vol. Except if the Torah brings another pasuk to tell you that you're allowed to get hana. But generally speaking, if the Torah says don't eat, it means don't eat, don't get pleasure in any way possible, unless the Torah then permits it. Chizkiah disagrees. Chizkiah says that when the Torah says lo yochel, then you're not allowed to get hana. But if the Torah says lo soichal, you are allowed to get hana. So far, is there any halachic nafkamina between Chizkiah and Rabbi? Very good. Both agree you're not allowed to get pleasure from chametz on Pesach. They only argue how we know it. Chizkiah says, I know it because the Torah says, lo ye'ochel, as I was trying to explain before, ye'ochel don't help it give you a cause for eating, which means pleasure. Rabbi Vol says, you don't need to come on so complicated. When the Torah says don't eat, the Torah means don't get pleasure. But there's no halachic nafkamina. There's no difference whatsoever between the two. Both agree not allowed to get pleasure on chametz on Pesach. The only argument is how we know it. Either because the Torah says, lo ye'ochel, don't allow it to become eaten, which means don't get pleasure. Or because the Torah says, lo ye'ochel, don't eat it, the Torah means please. Now we're going to go through different brises and different ways to understand. The Tanya, Rabbi Brisa. What is an nevela?
An animal that dies.
The animal dies without shechita. You're not allowed to eat it. Not allowed to eat it, you're allowed to get pleasure from it.
Yes, obviously, otherwise you can't get so good.
You haven't written it on your wallpaper. It's a machloikas. If you say lo soichlu, later we'll see, maybe, you're right. You're right that you're allowed to get pleasure because the Torah says you're allowed to get pleasure. But when the Torah votes lo soichlu kol nevela, the Torah at that stage, are you allowed to get hana or not? What would you answer me? It's a machloikas chizkiah and Rabbi. According to Rabbi Vol, you're not allowed to because the Torah says don't eat means don't get pleasure. According to Chizkiah, you're allowed because the Torah didn't say the words lo yochel. Later we're going to see that the Torah permits it. How does the Torah permit it? Because it says, give it to a goy, give it to sell it. So obviously the Torah holds that you're allowed to get pleasure. But from the beginning of the pasuk, you have a machlokes. Again, let's start the brayso again. The Tanya. Now, here, if you look very carefully, it takes a tiny bit of noticing, but the pasuk over here is slightly interesting the way it's written. The Torah tells us, with an nevela, you can give it to a ger or sell it to a goy. Right? Give it to a ger or sell it to a goy. Now, again, we're talking about a ger toshav where there's a mitzvah la'achayoseh, there's a mitzvah to support him if he's poor, there's a mitzvah ger toshav is somebody who tries his best. Give it to a ger or sell it to a goy. Now, if you look very carefully in the grammar of the pasuk is not written like that. If you look very carefully, the pasuk says, to a ger you should give it or sell it to a goy. It doesn't keep to the same method. It doesn't say give it to a ger or sell it to a goy. It says to a ger give it or sell it to a goy. The giving and the selling are put in the middle, with the ger on one side and the goy on the other. It says to the ger give it or sell it to the goy. Now that's not grammatically correct. You usually say like this: give it to a ger, sell it to a goy, or to a ger give it, to a goy sell it. Why do you put the giving and the selling in the middle and the ger and the goy on the outside? You can't give it to a Yid.
Better to give it to the guy.
Again, we go back again to Toshim. Again, Toshim is somebody who promises not to do avodah zarah, but he still eats non-kosher food. Again, I'm asking the question at the moment. The question is to hear the question at least. The question is a very important question. Why is the Torah put the gay and then giving and then selling and then the go? Why is the Torah put like that? Oh, very good. You just mecham to Tana. So God says, any other gay but the sin of nochi b'mechir, the gay b'mechir in ayin, how do I know allowed to sell it to a gay? Since it says, the Torah says, give it to a gay or sell it. How do I know I'm allowed to give it to a guy? That means by the fact that the Torah puts the two in the middle, what the Torah is telling you is like this: to a gay, give it or sell it, and then give it or sell it to a guy. So you can do either one. The Torah says like you, that you can give it or sell it to a gay or a guy, and that's why the Torah puts the two in the middle. The Torah wrote it exactly. A gay, you give it as a gift, a guy outside. That means you don't sell it to a gay and you don't give it to a guy. Why shouldn't you give it to a guy? Very good. You're not allowed to give a guy a present. It's an issa to give a guy a present. So that's why you can't give it to a guy. Why can't you sell it to a guy? Oh, because there's a mitzvah there's a mitzvah to support them. And Nebuch, this guy has nothing to eat, so you've got a mitzvah to give it to him. So Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to give it or sell it, give it to a ger or sell it to a ger. You can't do anything else. What's the sort of Rabbi Yehuda? Bishlev we can understand because the Torah wrote it strangely to teach you this halacha, like you said before. That the Torah wrote the two in the middle in order that you can do both to either. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't do both to either. Why did the Torah put it like this? So the Torah could have written it even more clearly. Why did the Torah put the word oy in the middle, or, which says to you like this: either give it to the gay or sell it to the goy. According to you, you could do either to either. So if that's the case, the Torah should say give it to a gay and sell it to a goy. Then you could understand. You could do both. So Gemara says the or tells us that it's two different statements. One to this way and one to the other way, and you can't do one to the other. We'll come to it. What's the purpose of the word oy? Why did the Torah attack about oy? To tell you that it is better to give it as a gift to a gay, which is a mitzvah, rather than selling it to a goy. For that we don't need the apostle. Since there's a mitzvah to mechaya a gay. Good, there's no mitzvah to keep him alive. It's a svor. So Torah asks you a question about what the Torah things I want to get to the ik and the kud over again. Going back, the Torah says, "Lo yiseichlu kol nevela," a dead animal you shall not eat. According to Chizkiah, what does that mean? That means you're not allowed to eat, but you are allowed to get pleasure. And then we have a whole pasuk, the gay, the nochi, and machlekes and men Rabbi Yehuda, what you should do with it when you're allowed to get pleasure. Should you give it to a gay? Sell it to a goy? That's a machlekes, what to do with the thing that you're allowed to get pleasure for. That is Shittas Chizkiah. According to Rabbi Vo, he says, the Torah says, Lo yiseichlu kol nevela. What's the Torah teaching us? You can't eat it, you can't get pleasure. And then the Torah says, yes, you can get pleasure. Now, Rabbi Vo says, why did the Torah need to tell me that you're allowed to sell it to a goy or give it to a gay? Why did the Torah need to teach me such a thing? Oh, says the Vo, a very interesting svor. The Vo is saying, if the Torah would not have told me allowed to give it to a gay or a goy, I would have understood that you're not allowed to. Why? Because since the Torah says don't eat it, I would have thought like me, like Vo holds, that the word eating includes eating and getting pleasure. So if that's the case, the Torah was forced to then continue and say, yes, you are allowed to get pleasure, give it to a gay. That means the very fact that the Torah told us, give it to a gay or a goy, or sell it to a goy, is my proof, says a Bavol, that when the Torah says don't eat it, it means don't get pleasure. The fact that the Torah needs to tell me, give it to a gay, why does it need to tell me such a thing? Answer, because if the Torah would not have told me, I would have thought it is asa b'hano. Why would I have thought it's asa b'hano? Because the Torah says lo seichlu. So the very fact that the Torah actually tells me you're allowed to give it to a gay or a goy teaches me my principle, which is what? that when the Torah says don't eat it, it means don't get pleasure. So in fact, this pasuk is a proof. It's a proof to me. The Torah tells us don't eat it, and the Torah says get pleasure is a vaya that normally when it says don't eat it, it means don't get pleasure. Is that proof sound? Is there a good proof? No. Why is it not good? Because if we need the pasuk to tell us what is the preferable method and the only method, meaning that to give you're only allowed to give it, and to go you have to sell it, you have no proof whatsoever. Maybe when the Torah says lo seichlu, the Torah means don't eat it, and the Torah means of course you're allowed to get pleasure. Oh, if you're allowed to get pleasure, so why did the Torah need to then continue and tell me what to do with it? The answer is the Torah wants to teach me what is the correct thing to do with it. Meaning that the fact is the pasuk is not spare at all. If you say that the Torah doesn't care how you do it, so then the pasuk is spare, and the pasuk is teaching us that you're allowed to get pleasure, meaning that without it you would think that lo yiseichlu means you're not allowed to get pleasure. But if you understand already that lo yiseichlu, if you say the Torah has to teach you the halachas of what to do with it, so the Torah is not spare, the pasuk is not spare at all. So more or less on the side. According to Rameir, that the Torah is telling you can do what you like with it. Give it, sell it, go, it makes no difference. So since the Torah needs to tell us that you're allowed to get pleasure, that means the fact that the Torah needs to tell us what to do with it, the Torah says you're allowed to get pleasure, teaches me that normally when the Torah says lo yiseichlu, what's the Torah mean? What's the Torah normally mean when it says lo yiseichlu, according to Rameir? No, so I'd say no. You're not allowed to get on. Since the Torah normally when it says lo yiseichlu means you're not allowed to get hano, here the pasuk needs to teach me that you're allowed to get hano. And don't tell me the pasuk needed to tell me the correct way of doing it. Why? Because Rameir holds there is no correct way of doing it. You're allowed to give it or sell it to a goy or to a ger. So since there's no correct way of doing it, when the Torah tells me to give it to a ger or a goy, it's not trying to tell me the correct way of doing it. Rather, what's the Torah trying to do? Tell me I'm allowed to get hano. Mashma, without that, the Torah is saying you wouldn't be. So therefore, you've got Moedik Chiddush over here. So therefore, the Torah tells me you're allowed to get pleasure. Otherwise, you think you're not allowed to get pleasure. So you need it because the Torah wants to tell you the correct way. How do you know that all of these are bano? It says more like this. The Torah says by treifa. Treifa is an animal you shechted, and after you shechted it, you found that what? It's got a huge mum. It's got something that would not survive. It would die anyway. So that's a treifa. What's the Torah say? Give it to the dog. And the Torah says, give it to the dog. Why did the Torah tell me give it to the dog? If the Torah would have told me to give it to the dog, what would I have done with it? Of course I'd give it to the dog. Because the Torah says don't eat it, and don't eat it without Rabba's understanding means don't eat to get pleasure. The fact that the Torah says don't eat it, but give it to the dog is teaching you that if I want to allow you to give it to the dog, not eating it is Issa Hano as well. The top of Chafes of Medalef, just do 4 lines. The Torah is teaching you. Only treifa you're allowed to give it to the dog. That's what the Torah teaches in you. Like the Torah says, don't eat a treifa. Give it to the dog. Only this you should give it to the dog. Everything else you can't give it to the dog. Why can't you give it to the dog? Because whenever the Torah says not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to get pleasure. And that is the source of Abavol. Rameir, what's Rameir do with it? Because according to Rameir, you don't need that. You've already got it from the pasuk of giving it to the gay or the goy, which teaches you how to get pleasure. You're not allowed to throw to the dog things that were shechted in cholish neshchtu ba'azor. Be'idoch, cholish neshchtu ba'azor la'avdu. I say it's not menater. Here we're going to go through a couple of cheshbonos and kedai to get it clear. There's a mitzvah to shecht korbanos to the Beis Hamikdash, and cholin there's an issa to shecht the Beis Hamikdash. How do you know you're not allowed to shecht a korban, a normal piece of meat in the Beis Hamikdash? How do you know? Where does the Torah say it? The Torah says, because the Torah says, if you live far away from the Beis Hamikdash, you should shecht and eat. Mashma, you can only shecht and eat far away from the Beis Hamikdash if you live far away. If you live nearby, you can't shecht and eat. So therefore, that's it. Now, what's the connection between bosa basada treifa? If you've got a treifa like kelev tashlich oisoy, you're allowed to give a treifa to the dog, but cholim, which was shecht to Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed to shecht. What's the connection? There's no connection. The answer is like this: that in that pasuk it says 2 things. It says bosa basada treifa loisachim. The word sod over there is completely spare. Why? Because the Torah says bosa basada treifa. If it's a treifa, you're not allowed to eat it. What difference makes if it's in the field? Let's say you find a treifa in the house. You're allowed to eat it? Of course not. Why is it supposed to say in the field? From there, the Gemara darshans a whole new drasha. that if an animal, when it's like we had in this week's parsha, that parrots came out, even though Zerach was put out his hand first. Now, if you've got a cow, that a baby cow sticks out its hand out of the womb, and then puts the hand back in, and then the animal is born, that hand is forbidden to be eaten forever. You're never allowed to eat that hand. Why? Because it came out of its normal mechitzas. And we learn that basoda, that anything that goes out in the field, anything that comes out of its barriers, field is always an open space, is forbidden to be eaten in, it's forbidden to be eaten. The Kevta Shechlos have to give it to the dogs. We dash from there that just like we see that something which is out of its mechitzas, you're not allowed to eat, but you're allowed to give it to the dogs. There's something that goes into a mechitza, and you're not even allowed to give it to the dog. What's something that goes into mechitza and you're not allowed to give it to the dog? What's that? No. That is how the drasha is, and that's what we learn from this pasuk. This is how we dash. We've got two ways to dash in this pasuk. Shittas Rabbi Yehuda we dash, this you should give to the dogs, and everything else not allowed to give to the dogs, because whenever the Torah says don't eat it, the Torah says don't get hano. And therefore this pasuk is teaching you that all Isurei Achila, all Isurei Hano. That is one way to understand the pasuk. Another way to understand the pasuk is completely different. Basa Basada Shreifa is telling you two different Isurim. One is the Issa Shreifa, all Shreifa animals, and Basada. Sada means things which go out of its barriers. What's that? An animal that sticks out its hand, which is forbidden to eat, right? Because it went out of its mechitza. But nevertheless, you're not allowed to eat it. But the pasuk finishes off, to give it to your dogs, which can be medayak. That's something else which doesn't come out of the mechitzas, but rather goes into a mechitza, which is chulin shechatu ba'azor, chulin which was supposed to be shechted outside the Beis Mikdash, and you put it into the Beis Mikdash. Not only not allowed to eat it, you're not even allowed to give it to your dogs. I should get the second man doma. The idor chulin shechatu ba'azor labdi. It's not awesome that and you're allowed to get a no. And therefore, you are allowed to get a no from Chulin Shechted Nasa. Okay, we'll start again. We start from a new topic. It's a newish, at least. We finished Chav Beis with Aleph, 5 lines from the top. Any questions? Good Chanukah, Yehuda, good Chanukah, Ian. I'm pressing it off.